is Roger Yates from Dublin, and it's raining. No, don't say that, people say. Never rains in Ireland. No. So, I'm going to be talking about sociology a bit tonight because I'm a guest of the Live Vegan podcast, so that's going to be interesting because I've been thinking about sociology, and it's interesting to me because psychology seems to be fairly popular within the movement, whereas sociology doesn't seem to be create as much interest. I sometimes wonder whether that's something to do with, our kind of neoliberal times, really, where people think as individuals and they don't necessarily think in collective terms anymore. I think that could be an issue. There was a time when, for example, if people, ask someone what they are, they might answer something like, "Oh, I'm working class." It's very unlikely that you would get a class-based answer to a question like that anymore because of the individual nature of society. And I think that it's kind of changed social movements too, in a way, because I'm not quite sure whether people in social movements think collectively either. Because the thing that we have to change more than anything else is cultural speciesism. I always argue that if we can't do that, then the other animals are rather screwed, really, because that's the only thing that's going to bring about meaningful change. And if we can't shift cultural speciesism, then it means that we're relegated to tinkering at the edges, which is one of the things that animal welfare does, tries to regulate atrocities and often fails, and legislation never ends up being the way that people wanted it in the first place because, well, it's been passed and run and monitored and everything else by speciesists. So cultural speciesism is really our issue. And so this is why I know there's a lot of opposition to pro-intersectionality in the movement, but this is why it's so important, because we also need the people who are also trying to make structural change elsewhere and change the culture elsewhere. So we need feminist-inspired activists, we need anti-racist activists, anti-capitalist activists. We're not going to do this on our own, a point that Steve Best makes in Total Liberation, the great speech he did in Luxembourg 2013. We're just not going to do it on our own. The struggle against patriarchy, the struggle against racism has been going on for years and years and years. The struggle against speciesism arguably has too, although not in a kind of more formal kind of social movement sense that it is now. And we are making some progress, but we still can't do it on our own. We're going to condemn ourselves to years and generations of failure if we don't join with people who are also trying to make some meaningful structural change to society, like the feminists, the anti-racists, etc., etc. On that, Steve Best is right. He's probably also got a very good point in the fact that we are a left-wing movement. Now, that kind of statement goes down very badly in the movement, and a lot of people would try to suggest that the animal advocacy movement is apolitical, if anything. But Best is saying, well, look at the values of our movement. Our values come from the left, and that is true. And that's why he says that we need to forge alliances with other left groups or with other groups which have these left values. And he actually said an interesting thing, because he said, whatever your politics are, you need to recognize that our values, the movement's values, are left-wing. I think there's a lot in that, and I know there's a lot of pushback to that. And I think that in some senses we're kind of reaping what we've sown in the last 30 years in the sense that we've pushed for the mainstream, and you've got Peter and their sexism and racism and all the rest of it, and you've got a lot of people who don't like humans, and a lot of people who do think that the movement is apolitical. And I think that there's been a big influx, because there's obviously been a big increase in veganism the last 5 years, say, but there's also been an influx of people whose values are probably not the same as the core values that I remember back in the 1980s. You know, when it was almost like we were naturally kind of pro-intersectional in those days. You know, like people would go sabbing, you know, hunt sabbing on a Saturday, and on a demo or even a raid on a Sunday. But then on a Monday you'd be doing a kind of Reclaim the Night march, you know, and then you'd be at a Rock Against Racism gig. So it was all the same to us, you know, and a lot of people came into the movement through punk music, which is very political, again in a kind of pro-intersectional way. You know, a lot of feminist lyrics, a lot of anti-racist stuff, a lot of things going on together. And it's when you combine those kind of forces and combine those kind of values, when you've got a chance, I think, to really shift the culture. Because if you think back to the vegan pioneers, they had a vision of society, a vegan vision of society. And in theory, in that society, you know, a vegan-based society, there wouldn't be domestic violence, and there shouldn't be rapes and male dominance, and there shouldn't be racism. A lot of people will argue these things are separate from veganism, but they're not, because veganism is about justice, and veganism has always been about justice according to the founders of our movement, you know. And I know, again, there's a lot of pushback to that idea too. The vegan movement has changed. It's become less political. It's become less intersectional, ironically at the time when intersectionality is kind of, if you like, taken off. But we've always talked in those terms. You know, ecofeminists talked about things like logic of domination. You know, Nybert talked about the entanglements of oppression and liberation. You know, these things had been talked about for years. It was just part of the way that we thought. It was part of the way that we saw our values informing lots of different issues to do with justice. That's what veganism is about. That's the core of veganism, justice for all. So when there's an issue of justice, somewhere along the line, that's going to be a vegan issue, you know. And I know that that is kind of too big for some people. I mean, I know that for a fact. You know, they kind of, oh, you're asking us to do too much there. But the point is, if we don't join with others and do that fundamental core structural work, then we'll just flounder. You know, and I think that's the truth of it. I'll put the link to the best talk that I regularly promote below. Check it out, you know, and see what you think. He's making the case for alliance politics, and there's a lot in it. And you know, if we want to make the kind of world that vegans say they want, then we're going to have to stop messing around, and we need to tackle the problem head on. And our problem is cultural speciesism, nothing less. It's not carnism, all this vegetarian bullshit that is wrapped up in the idea of carnism. It's speciesism. That is our main problem. We need to tackle it, and we need to get on with it, and we need to keep making the case that we're a pro-intersectional justice movement. That was the values of the founders of our movement, and it's ones that we should keep and not let fizzle away. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll catch you again.
I gotta go vegan. Hang on, is this a new Stevie Wonder classic? Go vegan. Go vegan. Go vegan. Go vegan. Go back, they go vegan. Go vegan. Go vegan. Back, they go vegan. Go vegan. Back, they go vegan. Go vegan. Go vegan.